Hi, today in this lesson I'm just going to talk about an alternative to the standard sort of bar chord shapes that most people learn when they've been playing for a certain length of time. And I've been looking at a lot of Blur songs lately in lessons and making some lesson videos on Blur songs. And Graham Coxon from Blur is a guitarist that does this particular thing I'm going to talk about all the time. Another very famous guitarist that did this was Jimi Hendrix. And all it is if you're playing a bar chord that's rooted on the E string, so what I'm thinking of here is, say if I was in the key of A, for example, A major, A minor. So if you're playing one of those, instead of barring, so if I take the major, just keep these fingers where they are. And what you can do is you can have your first finger just on two strings here, the first and second, because these three, when you're barring, this first finger is not needed on those three strings because these fingers are there. Obviously you can only bar all the way like that. You can't bar so that you're pushing on there and those two and not pushing on those three. You have to push on all of them. So that you're putting extra effort in there that's maybe not needed. So what you can do by doing this is you're losing one note from your bar chord. So you can use your thumb, depending on your thumb length and the neck on your particular guitar, get your thumb to just come around and touch that note there like that. The thumb's very strong, it doesn't need to go round very far to get the note, you can just sort of touch like that. So now I've got every note that was in the bar chord. But it's much less effort in terms of how hard you feel like your hand is working to try and get this chord to ring. That feels much easier. To me, it feels much easier than that. Well, a bit easier anyway. I'm quite used to bar chords now, so I should be. So yeah, I can still do the bar chord, but I know if I was playing a gig and especially on acoustic guitar, which is a bit harder, and I had a lot of songs with bar chords in, I would definitely use this more than this because it's less tiring for your hand. And when you watch someone like Graham Coxon or Jimi Hendrix and you see them playing like that, that's one of the main reasons why they do that. Certainly Graham Coxon, the way he plays, you can just see he does that all the time. You never see him play that. He'll do that. So that's one reason why you might use that shape. There's another sort of very similar alternative to this, which is where we miss out the A string. So if we take the bar chord again, fifth string, we can lose that because the note that's being played is found somewhere else in the chord anyway, it's there. That's the same note, they're both E's in this example. So we can lose that and we're not compromising the sound of the chord at all because we've already got the E there anyway. So by losing that, what I mean is we can do this thing that I just spoke about, but now we can get rid of the little finger and put the third finger on the fourth string instead. So what happens now is you have to avoid the A string, or the best way to do this is to just touch it from underneath with that finger, so it mutes it. Then you could strum, and you've got all of the notes from the bar chord again, but without this one. So you've got. Now, there's three advantages to this. One is that you've got a finger not doing anything. So what Hendrix would do is he'd use that to embellish the chord with things. So you've got this spare, so you can do things like that. Another advantage is that because we're not using the A string, the distance between our bass note here and the next note in the chord is bigger, because what we'd have had before would have been this note as the next note of the chord, so you'd have the bass note and then that note. But now we're missing that string out, so the distance between the bass note and the next chord is bigger now because it's to there, it's an octave. And the effect that has is it separates the chord from the bass, And if you're playing, in particular if you're playing on your own rather than in a band, it gives you a lot more clarity, I've found, because it makes the bass sound almost like a separate instrument rather than this. And that can, depending on your sound, it can be a bit muddy sounding, having that fifth string involved. And I always like the idea of separating the bass from the rest of the chord. And this is how a lot of jazz guitarists play, especially if you're using your fingers rather than a pick. You can literally separate them. So you get chords like this. And I've got the bass note further away from the chord, so you get this separation. And I said there were 3 advantages to this one. The third one is the most obvious one, is just there's less going on, so it's easier for your fingers and for your hand, because rather than pushing on 6 strings, we're actually pushing on 5 strings. So there's a little bit less effort here for this left hand. It's also slightly easier for your thumb to reach round when you're not doing that. Doing this, that's a little bit harder to get than that, just slightly. So there are several advantages to using this one with the thumb over the top. The disadvantage to this one is that if you're not able to get your thumb over the top, then you're compromising a bit on the fullness of the chord sound, because you're only playing 4 strings. And you have to then avoid hitting these 2. Otherwise you might get notes that don't really work. So yeah, that's not so good. Unless you're playing an electric and playing in a band and doing sort of small movements with this hand, then that works okay. Right, so the examples I just did then were the majors. The exactly same thing with the minor. So there's the major bar chord, there's the minor bar chord. Same thing. I can do this. So now I've got to flatten that over 3 rather than 2, because we haven't got this finger here. And then thumb there. I think that's slightly harder to play than the major one. And then the slightly simpler version, where we've got the separation between the bass and the chord, would be just like we did with the major. Do that. Touch that from underneath. And that's quite nice. So let's say if we had a song with G to A minor, G major to A minor, instead of doing this, I could do this. Or this. These chords really only apply to the 6th string rooted bar chord, so the major and the minor that I was just talking about. Someone like Coxon, for example, when he goes to the 5th string bar chords, he always just plays the normal bar chord. So if he was playing something like G to D minor, a lot of people would go, even though that's quite easy because they're very similar shapes. What he would almost certainly do is this. Even though that's more movement, he's just got used to playing his E shape bar chords like this. So you go like that. And it's not that hard when you're used to them. Rather than... So it's not always better to do that than to do that, but there are certain advantages, and it's definitely worth exploring that way of playing the chord if you haven't already done so. So yeah, I hope that all makes sense, and click like if you like this one. Please subscribe to the channel unless you've already done that, and any questions about this, put them in the comments. Okay, thanks.